Good evening, everybody. It is the beginning of the school year, and I am back to recording. In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the basics of Maya. If you are familiar with Maya, this is not the video for you. This is for anybody who has just kind of opened it up for the first time and is new to the interface. So this one's going to be a little bit more to that sort of perspective. All right, so let's get started. Right here, this big open area is the viewport, and I have a few things on my viewport, or on my layout here. Don't worry about that too much, but this big open space is the viewport. This little heads up is just our poly count, which we can get to through display, and then heads up display. Where you at? Heads up display, and then poly count. I'll just go ahead and turn that off to not bother anybody. This checkered crisscrossy thing, this is our grid. This is basically your floor in Maya. All the way to the left we have our basic navigational tools. So your pointer, this is a little arrow. You have a lasso tool, so you can lasso and catch whatever's on your screen. So I have a couple objects here, for example. Let's make those pretty big, and I'm just going to throw these around. So your lasso lets you kind of do like one of these, and you can capture both items. You can also, with just a regular pointer, you can do what's called a marquee select. That's just dragging out a box, and you can select both. That adorable sound in the background, that is the kitty cat. This is Misty. Hi, kitten. Down here we have our paint selection tool. So if you hover over your object, you can paint a selection of components. Down here is the move tool, which will let you move a component or an object depending on what mode you are in. Go back to object mode here, unless we move the object. This little rotation widget, this lets you rotate the object in one of the axes, or you can grab this blue one for multiple axes. And then this tool down here, this is our scale tool. So if I grab this object, you can see that the widget has changed to boxes, and I can scale it up or down. Okay, we'll go over that in just a sec. Down on this side, we have our viewport layout. So we have, this is our perspective. This is our foreview. Splits it into 4 different views. So we have our perspective view, and then our 3 orthographic views. An orthographic view is a view that is straight on from one side. Things in an orthographic view are not skewed by perspective, so anything that is behind an object is the same depth as anything ahead of the object, so you will see everything kind of in the same way. So like if I look here, even though these objects are of different depths, they appear to be at the same depth. Although I don't think Maya's orthographic view is true orthographic. And then front view and side view also. Down here we have, this one is our animation graph and our perspective kind of split. And you have a few others down here as well. I'm not going to go into all these, but you can, of course, modify these. And they'll give you different layouts. Like this has our hypergraph, and then our animation curves tool, and then our perspective. What's this one? And this one brings up the, this is our hyper shader. And we'll get into what shaders are later on. Alright, so I'm going to go back to foreview, and then I'm going to go back to perspective. So to change views in Maya, of course you can click over here, but the hotkey is just press the spacebar, and it'll bring up whatever your last toggleable view is. So if I pick a couple different views, it'll go between, you know, your perspective and then whatever else you had. So if I go to here and then hover my mouse over, I'll go here. If I hit spacebar again, hover my mouse here, and then spacebar, and so on. It's important to realize you don't have to click between the views, just put your mouse there. Clicking doesn't really do anything. You can see that I am selecting the panel. There's a bit of a highlighter bar on that, but selecting the panel does not jump into the panel. It goes wherever your mouse is. so you don't have to click to go there. If you click and hold, if you press spacebar and hold, you'll bring up this little markup menu. And if you accidentally click while you're trying to go to one of these, you may accidentally click one of these extra modes and go somewhere else. So it's important that you realize that you don't have to click between these, so you don't accidentally change your viewport. Viewports can be changed up on the top bar here under View. You have, of course, your view. You can go to a camera, all this good stuff here. But if you want to change a viewport by itself, at the end of the bar, you have panels, and each one of these is a panel. If I go here, we have our perspective. We can also create a new one if we wanted to. And we have orthographic, which is our front, top, and side. So like if I change this to top, now I have two top views, right? I can change this one to perspective if I want it. Okay, so that's where those are. Oops, go back to orthographic and top. And go back to perspective. Each view is also independent. So if I do something in one view, let's say on this viewport, I'll go to shading and I'll turn on, let's say, I'll do wireframe on shaded. You can see that the wireframe exists on top of the shaded object, but over here it doesn't. Each viewport has its own setting. Okay, go ahead and turn that back off. I'll hop back into perspective. Let's see. Up here we have our shelf. This is where all of our primitive objects and basic tools are going to be. Each one of these shelves has a tab that brings you into different editing tools. So we have, these are all curves and surfaces, polygons, sculpting. Sculpting is kind of neat, lets you, oops, let me scale it down. Lets you modify an object that you have selected. I have to select that thing first. I'm not getting much pull on that one. Let's change its size, strength, bring that up. And there we go. So you can see I can sculpt directly on the tool, or on the object. Rigging deals with animation and skeletons, joints and that sort of thing. The animation tab deals with setting up animation features, keyframes, and pretty much anything you have to deal with animation goes there. Rendering is lights, cameras, and shaders. Shaders deal with color, but we'll get into that later. Effects like hair and particle systems, effects is just particle systems. And then we have, we now have an XGen mode that deals with hair. So XGen does hair. Effects caching, and you can make your own custom shelf. So if you have items that you want to add to it, you can drag those on. So for example, if I wanted to, let's go to mesh tools here and whoops. Go ahead and do that again. So if you hold down Control and Shift and the middle mouse click and drag, you can drop an item onto your custom shelf. Now I did notice I'm missing the trash can icon, so I can't remove items from my custom shelf, but it's okay. You can delete your shelf and say, yeah, sure. And then of course that goes away, but then you can always add one later. So like down here, I can do a new shelf and I can call this custom. And my shelf is back. So, you can do whatever you like. Moving on, I'm going to go back to this menu up here. This is our working menu. And we have different editing modes. We'll get to these. There's little tabs here that you can click on these to close or collapse areas. So this one is all of your saving and opening and forward and back, like undo and redo. This one opens up it shows what mode you're in. Right now I'm in objects. You can of course new animation or any of these here. Sorry, I had to be careful there. Hotkeys sometimes mess with the recording software. Let's close back. This one opens up this little panel here, so you can get like move icon and joints and other stuff in here. Whoops, collapsing too much. Let's see, what else we got? This one is our snaps. So you have snap to grid. You can snap to an object or a component, or you can create a live object. I don't have it where you highlight and then the message pops up, but if you look down here, right under where it says Mel, whenever I hold my mouse over, you'll see down there it tells you what each icon is doing. So there's snap to grid, snap to projected center, snap to points, snap to a curve, and so on. Right here it says no live surface, but if I select the surface and then click this, it creates a live surface. And all a live surface is an object that things will stick to. So if I come down to here and I create a polygon, and grab that. And as I go to move this, it'll stick to this surface. So even if I try to pull it away, it wants to stick to this surface here. Now, of course, you do have to grab the, you can see the thing in the middle is circular, and that's telling it that when I click and drag that, it'll stick to there. If I drag the arrow, I can move it away. And if I uncheck that, you will see that this is now square and it does not stick to whatever. So there's a little square icon there. Okay, go ahead and open that up. We have these. What is that? That's inputs and outputs. These are our rendering tabs, so you can click and render, and then it'll try to give you a higher quality view. So the viewport is a low quality render because it saves on memory, and this is a higher quality render based on the lighting and whatever else is in your viewport. And this toggles the position of something in your viewport. So you can, of course, type in. See what I have is if I type in like 100, and that snaps it somewhere on the grid there. And I happen to have the move tool. So if I go to a different tool, let's say scale, and I type in 30, I've scaled it in the X, 30. Okay, so moving on. Over here we have our channel box. This is skinny box here. It says channel box. You can click the little tab to turn this on and off. You also have the attributes right here. Attributes show you everything about the object, so what type of object it is, where it is in space, components of that object. So a pivot, that's that thing here, this little icon, its position relative to the object. This is its pivot point, and then the object itself, or the little arrows, this is your widget, but the thing in the middle is your pivot. Let's see, other details about it, and then finally down here is the shader material that's currently on it, so you can change its color. So like, pick that, and there we go. So we've changed the color. Now all these change because they all wear the default skin, basically, or a default shader. So this one has Lambert 1, Lambert 1, Lambert 1, and you can add whatever you want. So if I come over here and just pick a different one, now this one's different. Okay, moving on. To open up these, up at the very top here, to the right, you have these different tabs. These each open up different parts of this. So this little stack of like little papers in the corner, this is your channel box. And you can toggle between whatever menu you currently had open. So it's channel box. This one is attributes. This little hammer is your tool settings, which is what this menu here is on the left that is currently open. If I click the little hammer, you can see the tool settings go away. So whatever tool you have, so if I grab this tool, it'll change whatever these settings are, and so on. And then this one here brings up some other tools that you can have. So it's your modeling toolkit, and you have access to all these. So stuff like quad draw, which is kind of neat. You can kind of make some points and then fill it in, and now you have a quad, and you can just keep doing that. It's a handy tool. And let's see. This little menu on every viewport has stuff like active cameras, viewing your grid, turning on shaded mode versus wireframe, and so on. So on that note, we're going to look at the different editing modes in Maya. So if I come up to our first editing mode, you can just tab here, and there are 5 editing modes plus a custom one. We're in modeling. There's rigging, animation, FX, and rendering. So in modeling, we have all of the modeling tools. And up here at the very top, of course, we have file and edit and all that good stuff. But past, pretty much past edit and select, we have things that only talk to what mode we're in. So actually, it's really past window, once you get past window. So we have mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools, and all the stuff that you would deal with if you're working with a mesh or a static mesh or a polygon. If I change this to rigging, you'll see past windows. We get skeleton, skin, deformation, constraint, and these deal with all the stuff you would need for doing rigging or adding bones or joints and that sort of thing. And then stepping down from that, we have animation, and this changes to keys and playback and visualization, visualize, and so on and so forth. FX brings up the FX and particles and fluid dynamics and all that good stuff. And then rendering brings up lighting and shading and texturing and that good stuff. So if you're ever working and you realize that, hey, I need to get to a tool for cutting geometry and you can't find it up here, make sure you're under the correct tab. So all the geometry stuff is going to be under modeling. You can also get to these by pressing the hotkeys. The hotkeys for that. See if I can do this without turning off my software. So if I hit F6, you can see it changes to rendering. F5 goes to FX. F4 is animation. F3 is rigging. F2 is modeling. And F1, as you can see, brings up the help icon. Okay, so in order, so F1 is help, 2 is modeling, 3 is rigging, 4 is animation, 5 is effects, and then 6 is rendering. And then 7 is not customized, 7 is multi-select. So if you hit 7, you will see it changes to multi-select. What multi-select does, it allows you to select multiple components of a polygon or whatever you're working with. So a polygon is made up of faces and edges and vertices. So I can select a face, or I can select an edge, or I can select a vertex. And all I'm doing, I'm holding shift and clicking on the thing. F8 brings you back into object mode. My recording software shuts off with F8 and F9, so I can't do that here. You can't see the button press anyway, but object mode toggles between object mode and component mode. And then F9 is vertex mode, so if I go to vertex mode, it lets me select only vertices. So this is where I can move just a vertex. I can move it, I can rotate it, and I can scale it. Now you can't scale one vertex, and you can't rotate one vertex. I mean, technically you could, but the influence is nothing, so you can't really do that. But if you have multiple vertices, you can scale them however you like, or rotate them however you like. Okay. I didn't cover navigation. I kind of got away from that, but to navigate, if you're kind of confused, you'll notice that clicking does nothing to navigate, and all that good stuff. So to navigate, you have to hold down the Alt key. So if I hold down Alt and left click, that's the one with your pointer finger. That lets you kind of grab the canvas and rotate it. If you hold down Alt and middle mouse click, that's where the mouse wheel is. You push on the mouse wheel, you can pan. And if you hold down Alt and then right click, you can dolly in and out. Now this is kind of the same thing as rolling the mouse wheel. So if I roll the mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out. Sorry, can zoom in and out. But you can see it kind of ticks. It's a bit of a jump, whereas the dolly effect is very smooth. Okay, so that's your basic navigation. For your basic tools like movement and your pointer, if I hit Q, that goes back to the pointer. If I hit W, it brings up the move tool. So if I grab, go back to object mode here. If I grab this object, you can see that this is now the move tool. It's got arrows on it. If I hit E, that brings up the rotation tool. Don't ask me why it's not R, it just isn't. If you press the R, it brings up the scale tool. You can scale. And that's pretty much it. If you hit Y, actually resets the previous tool that you had. So if I, now let's see, what tool can I use? Let me grab, I don't know, create polygon. So if I do create polygon, this is a tool, and I'll kind of get out of that, and then I press Y, it'll go back to my previous tool, and you can see it jumped here. So if I grab this and then press Y again, it goes back to here. So it selects your last tool. If I perform an action, let's say I take this and I go to Edit Mesh, and we'll do, I don't know, bevel, right? You can do that. You can activate the last action you've done by pressing G. So if I grab this guy in the background here and press the G key, it will then do the bevel on that again. You can see it beveled there. All right, now that we have navigation down, should have done that first. Coming back up, we have, let's see, we were in vertex mode. Vertex, you can grab a vertex. Of course, you can move that. Edge mode lets you grab an edge, and that is F10. Again, if I can't push them, otherwise it'll shut my recording software off, but you can grab an edge. And of course, if I'm in move, I can move the edge. If I am in scaling, I can scale the edge. And if I am in rotation, I can rotate an edge. Now, modifying an edge is the same as modifying two vertices at the same time. So if I grab this thing here, and I go into vertex mode and I grab one vertex and then two, you can see how the widget kind of centers on the two of them, and I can move both. But if I grab an edge, it is the same as if grabbing both. So that's that. This flat surface here that is a plane, to get to there it's F11, and I can also go here and grab that, and I can select the plane, and that's like moving 4 vertices, or however many occupy that plane at the same time. And of course I can rotate that, I can scale it, and I can move it respectively. The little markup menu that I'm using is for right-clicking. So if I right-click and hold, Maya's a little bit weird like that. You have to right-click and hold. I think it's the only thing I've used that's ever had this feature. But if you right-click and hold, you get this little markup menu, and you can pick between here, inside of your list, or whatever not. If you hold down the Shift key while you right-click, it'll give you a different menu. And this menu gives you things specific to whatever you're working on. So in this case, I'm working with a polygon, but I also have, I'm also in face mode. So to modify faces, we have, paint selection. We can cut a face, we can wedge a face, we can extrude a face. If I hit this extrude one, it'll give me the option to extrude, and I can pull that up. But if I'm in vertex mode and I hold down Shift and then right click, it gives me all the stuff. Oops, I'm still selecting that face there. There we go, select that vertex. I get all the stuff for selecting vertices or modifying vertices. So I can extrude a vertex. You're not supposed to do that, but I will. You can delete vertices, you can detach them, and all that good stuff. So I'll go ahead and extrude the vertex there. And you can see when I extrude the vertex, it creates some triangles, which aren't really favorable, but yeah, it's already there. And if I, of course, go to edge mode and select an edge, hold Shift, right click, I get some modifications for edges. I can bridge an edge, I can also extrude an edge if I wanted to, I can bevel the edge. Let's do a bevel, and that splits it. Let's go grab this one and I'll bevel. Bevel, 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 there you are. There you go. And that bevels that edge. There are also some submenus in there, so if I go ahead and go to face mode, let's go down to face mode, which has a little arrow. If I go to the arrow, it'll open that up and it gives you another menu. To get back, you just kind of trace your mouse back to the dot and it'll follow. Just like down here for like mapping and all that stuff. Okay. And then lastly on our list is F12. F12 is UV mode. So UV mode is here. And UVs cannot be modified in 3D space. They actually have to be used in the UV editor. So if I come up to UVs and go to UV editor, that brings up this little window here. Let's minimize that. Shrink that down. We'll get into what UVs are, but you can only mess with these guys in the UV editor. It used to be you could mess with them in 3D space, and that caused a lot of problems. So now you can only do it in here. So if I grab one out here, you can see I don't have the option to do any movement to it, but I do have the options over here. And they follow all the same rules. You can scale them, or you can scale a pair of them, and you can move them. You can rotate vertices or UVs, but you can only do it in 2D space. So they only rotate one plane. So coming down here, we have our animation stuff. So this is our timeline. So if you wanted to record animations, it's down here. If you want to know how many frames you can see, that's this little guy right here. This is your time slider. And, or sorry, Maya's a bit weird. This thing here is actually called your time slider. Anywhere else it would be called a timeline. The thing below it, this here is your range slider. And there's little tabs here. If you move these tabs, you can change the range of how many frames you're currently seeing. So right now I'm between frame 1 and 1, and I can go up to frame, I have a maximum of 200 frames, but I have currently in my view 120. I can expand that or change that. And I can type in here too. So if I type in, 120, it'll go there. If I type in something bigger than my max range, it'll just change my max range. So like 300, boom, and then it couldn't go any further, so I had to change my max range. You can also type in what frame you want to go to. So if I go to frame, 130, it'll jump my little tick to frame 130. Or let's go to 145. 145. You can see it jumped a tick to 145. On this end, we have our playback range. So let me animate something real quick, so that makes it easier. I'll go ahead and nuke these guys. We don't need those. Throw this into here. Okay, so here's my object. I'm just going to animate from, I'll go from frame 1 here to pick a different spot on the timeline. I'll go to frame 70, and I'll go over here, and I'll do that. And then between these two, now it plays, right? So to kind of get an idea of the range slider, if I come down and say I only want this to play back, if I hit the play button, you can see that it played the animation, but it's still going, right? Because there's no frames out here. So if I hit stop, and I only want this to play to 70, I can come down here, and I can say I only want you to play to 70. If I go down here and put my range to 70, it drops it here. I could change the physical number of, or the actual number of frames, because there are frames that kind of exist out in space here. But it doesn't really matter. I can't go further than what's on my range. So now if I hit play, it'll go to 70, and then it'll go back to 0, right? But what if I wanted to see something, say, between frame 34 and frame 70? Well, if I come down here and type in frame 34, it adjusts my minimum range. So I have an absolute minimum range of 1, but I have a viewing minimum range of 34. So I'm viewing between frame 34 and frame 70. And if I hit play, you can see it's going between frame 34 and frame 70. So frame 1 started all the way back here, right? Go ahead and stomp that. And then lastly, we have down here where it says Mel script. And you actually have the option to write in Mel or in Python. It accepts either, which is kind of cool. You can write code to do whatever you can do in 3D that is applicable to either Mel script or Python in relation to Maya. And lastly, we're going to look at the different viewing modes that you have, or display modes you have in Maya. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the sphere, and I'm going to go up to polygons. I'm going to create a cube, and I'm just going to make this big enough to see. Maya has several different viewing modes, or display modes. The one that we're currently in is rough mode. So rough mode shows you the true look of your object. If I go ahead and press 2 on the keyboard, it brings me into medium display, which is a outline of the actual object and a projection or a preview of what the object is going to look like once you smooth it. So if you were to smooth a cube, it would become a sphere. So that is correct. That's what I would see here. If I press 1, I can go back to rough mode. So 1 is rough, 2 is smooth, or sorry, 2 is medium. 3 is a smooth preview without the wireframe. So you can see it looks like a sphere. Be aware that 2 and 3 are not honest. So if I were to export this object into some other program, it would export out as a cube, because this is what it really is. This is just a preview. If I wanted to actually smooth this, I'd have to go up to mesh and then run a smooth algorithm. And there's the approximation. And you can see that its approximation isn't as true as the preview, right? So if I hit 3 again and get a preview, it'll show me a better approximation. But it's not true, right? So if I bring up my divisions, the more I divide this, the more true to a sphere it would become. So just be aware of that. 4 is wireframe. 5 is shaded, and you can see it says up here. 6 brings up texture. I don't have a texture applied to this, but if I did, you would see it here. Let's go ahead and just do that. Attributes. Whoops. Let's go all the way here. I'll grab this. I'm going to very quickly, you don't have to worry, I'm going to throw on a texture here. So here's a texture, and if I hit 5, we're back into shaded, but if I hit 6, we're textured. And it's changed back to gray because I put something in there, so it's whatever the default shader was. So 6 is textured, 5 is shaded. 7 turns on all your lights, but since we have none in our scene, we don't see anything. So if we go up to rendering, and I drop in, I don't know, a directional light, and I drag this out, it's hard to see because it's really tiny. I'm going to go ahead and scale that up. Scaling a light doesn't really do anything, but it lets you see the widget. So you can see from that direction, I have light being applied. And if I, of course, change the direction of the light, it's all there. So if I had lights, and I were to hit render, we would get a projection of what the item would look like if we were to render it. So there it is, the checkered, and then the light is being applied. No light on this side, so it's in shadow. It's kind of cool. Lights also have an option for down here, this little widget. If I click that, I get a little handle, and that allows me to aim the light, which is kind of handy. And then, of course, to get rid of the handle, you just click off somewhere else. You click on one of these, as long as you're not selecting this. And then over here in the channel box, channel box is going to show you pretty much all the stuff that's on your object. So we have translation, which is the movement of an object in space. You can, of course, type in here. So if I hit 0, I can move these, or whatever number I put in, I'll move it. You have rotation. Any of these will rotate the object. And then scale changes the scale of an object. If you want to scrub, select whatever the word is, and then middle mouse click, and then drag, and that'll let you scrub the thing. And then down here we have this little curly Q. This is auto key. So if you're doing animations and you don't want to have to sit there and manually press the keyframe button, you can set this. So if I come down here on this cube, let's say at 46, and I keyframe at least once, and then I go somewhere else, and then I move this, like if I move this over here, you'll see on 55, once I let go, it drops a keyframe in. So that automatically updates my frames as I'm going. Otherwise, like if I turn this off and I move, let's move this somewhere else, no key drops. I have to do it manually to change the next key. So it's kind of neat, but it does make it can be a headache sometimes if you don't want to change a key and you forget. So now I have this animation thing going on. I guess another hotkey for the sake of argument is A. A frames up centered on the object. F, if you're zoomed out, will also center. So A gets you nice and tight on there, and then F is not quite as tight. So if I move it over here and hit F, it jumps to. If I hit A, it's centered. And then Control A brings up the attributes. You can toggle that on and off. And then lastly, 0 on your keyboard sets everything back to default. So you can see down here, it goes back to default. So if I hit 2, for example, and then hit 0, it goes back to the default setting, which is rough. If you want to get out of lights, just hit shaded or textured, it'll turn the lights off. Some other useful hotkeys: if you hold down the X key, you can actually see the widget here. There's a little square. If you hold down X, you can see it changed to a circle. That is snap to grid. So if I drag this, you can see it snaps to a grid line. If I grab the circle as I do that, I can snap it in multi directions, whereas dragging an arrow snaps just in that direction. If you want to turn that on permanently, of course, you can click this, and then that'll snap to the grid that way. And if I hold down X, it does the opposite, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on, or off in this case. If you hold down the V key, it'll snap this to the component or another object. So I'll go ahead and make another object here. I'll just copy this one. Control D is to duplicate an object, by the way. So if I take this object, hold down V, and then drag the arrow, it'll snap it to the nearest component that my mouse is next to. So right now my mouse is nearest this vertex. So if I come down here, it goes there. So it's technically vertex selection holding down V. And if I hold down, if I grab the center here, it's easier to see. So that vertex, or that one, or that one. So that is vertex selection. And that should be all of the stuff about the interface in a nutshell. Hopefully that gets you started, and I will see you guys in the next video.